You know what my big brain thought about today as I was getting back from the gym? I was like, nice, the restriction list is today. I have, something to react to. And then I forgot that it's next week instead. Today we're going to be talking about my predictions for this restriction list. This is a video I wanted to do originally, and then I was like, oh, but it's coming out on the, 18th? So I was like, I can't do it then, so I have to, push it for whenever. But luckily, the restriction list is next week, and therefore I have time to make this video. So, today we're going to be talking about the potential restrictions for both standard and premium, and I'm going to basically break it down into both formats. But before we begin, obviously, first things first, thank you to all the channel members. Your support is very much appreciated. Don't have any new ones to mention, but alas, still big thank you. And then, apart from that, the kind of premise to this restriction list prediction is that with each restriction list, there are, in my opinion, 3 ways that it can go. First one of which is the infamous no changes, which has happened before, where they hype up a restriction list, they say it's happening on this day, don't forget it's happening on this day, and then it happens and it's just no changes, nothing to standard, nothing to premium, and it's just like, okay, so they hyped us up for nothing. The second one of which is the kind of, I'd say, not even damage control, but just like your typical, normal restriction list. The problem decks are addressed and kind of left at that. Maybe sometimes they go a bit further than that, but, relatively standard, like what you would expect kind of thing. So it's like if you've been talking about certain decks being restricted for the last, month or so, that's probably what's going to get restricted. And then the third one is the Thanos Snap, which Vanguard hasn't really had too much of. The previous one felt a bit like that with the Ichikishima ban, but alas, it wasn't much of a big restriction that changed much. But Konami, for example, recently did a Thanos Snap restriction list in which basically all the meta decks got a hit, but then it didn't actually change the meta too much. But, it was, I guess that's kind of like our last one, actually. But anyway, so I think there will be some predictions I'll make where I'll say if they go for this, format, they want to reset the entire format, then they'll do this. But otherwise, I think we're going to go for a more normal restriction list. I don't think they're going to do anything too crazy. I think just the kind of obvious problem children will be addressed and kind of left at that. So I kind of went ahead with that mindset when creating this video. So we're going to go through both standard and premium. I'm going to begin with premium first. Now, also another premise is that these restriction lists are made by Bushiroad Japan initially, and it's very rare for Bushiroad, well, SEAO / just West, to ever differ, and especially not in the last 5 years or so. I don't think they've differed. But basically with these restriction lists, they basically look at both the clan usage and conversion from all BCSs and WGPs and stuff like that, and also the tops from the worlds for both WGP and BCS. This is what we presume. We don't know exactly what they look at, but I mean, it's kind of assumed that they look at those things. Or, well, I guess the Japan side doesn't even mention the foreign events, but we know, we can assume that they look at foreign events for these kind of things. But so, having said that, I think the premium restrictions will be as follows. I think, first things first, I don't know if this is a hot take, I think a lot of people will agree that I think they will unban Ichi, because, I mean, it felt like the ban was going a bit too far to begin with. I think just restricting her a little bit, to 2 or 1 copies is fine. I think 1 copy is fine because you don't have to flip her specifically, but I just feel like, I don't know, banning her outright was a big move, let's put it that way. And so I feel like they're gonna actually unrestrict her. I think that they kind of jumped the gun with that restriction, and a lot of people expressed that, I mean, didn't feel necessary, and OTT still wins fine without her, but it's still seen more as a rogue deck, and I think that would help to push OTT back into the meta, but not necessarily super top dog. Unless the remaining restrictions that I predict will take place, in which case that might be different. So I feel like if they do unrestrict Ichi, they will still put some restriction on her, but they'll at least unban her so she's usable again. Because I feel like that really set a new precedent in the sense that, sometimes I make this argument of oh, I don't think this will get restricted because it just came out. Or now when I talk about standard, if we're going to talk about Bermuda restrictions, it's oh, I don't think it'll happen because the set only came out a couple months ago. But then Ichi was really just 3 months, I think, after release that they just, bam, just destroyed it and just banned it outright. And I think that kind of set a new precedent, and that means that it's possible that we'll see a, some kind of effect on the premium scene for, on the standard scene for Bermuda. But, so that's my first prediction. Second one, I think a lot of people will probably have this one too, is Wonder Azel. Restricted, I think, not banned, to 1 or 2 copies, I would say, because that way at least, like, it's not that you just pop off, make a million Axel circles, and just, all your plays suddenly become really, really explosive. Whether it's going for Ultima or anything else, or just, having huge board presence as a whole. And I feel like that Wonder Azel is a very big potential restriction. I just don't know to how many copies they'll restrict it, because restricting to 1 just makes like this random tech you're basically running, and it's like, if I draw into this cool extra Axel circle plus Ultima fixing, but if not, that makes things different. And I think the more important part is that restricting Wonder Azel is like, yes, it takes away from their Axel spam, but it most importantly takes away from that Ultima fixing and things like that. So, I wouldn't say most importantly, I guess both factors are pretty heavy, but I feel like that would be pretty big in terms of shaping up the meta going forward, because Azel is a big player right now, and it's just pretty dominant. It did well in both WGP and BCS, and it didn't really struggle to perform very well, and that's just not too surprising in that sense, given how strong the deck is, and we've seen clearly how good it is. So that, I think, should be happening. I don't know what other kind of Azel restriction they would do otherwise. Spear X restriction I don't think is necessary, because Spear X is a good card for every other Gold Paladin deck. That's like the problem with Ichi, is that she was good in everything for OTT, but then, it's just like, there was a build that could abuse it, and that's just how it was, but you could still win against that build. I don't think it was that, like, invincible, but that's just my take on it. But yeah, Wonder Azel I feel like is the main candidate for golds in terms of restrictions. Then I think that Maiden of Gladiolus will see a restriction. I think, like, Katrina and the plant deck and premium has changed a fair bit over time, but it's still, even with the new pieces it gets, they're just like new combo extenders. But the key card that is Gladiolus, and extending those attacks and actually making the combo, I think is very, very like prevalent, and it always will be. This is a card that was one of the first Neonectar releases of the G era, which was back in 2014, I think. Yes, and no, not 2014, 2015. Yes, I think that's when it came out. Sorry, my brain is kind of fuzzy, but yeah, so, having this card exist for 5 years and still be so important for Neonectar right now, it wasn't for a long time in G, but in Premium it really is one of the main key cards, so I feel like that's going to see a restriction. I feel like that's a good way to put a damper on Katrina, because that way it's still a strong deck. That's the thing with Azel too, I feel like it would still be a strong deck even without Wonder Azel, just not as consistent and as explosive as it was. And I think for plants, restricting Gladiolus would have the exact same effect. It's just making the deck less explosive, but still very strong. And I think that that's the kind of format they want to have. But then obviously, if you unban Ichi and then restrict those two decks, then what becomes of the format? Well, then DI kind of starts creeping up, and pun not intended, but I feel like it starts creeping up, but I'm not sure how you would restrict DI, because I felt like the Assassin restriction was really, really good. And now going forward, it's just like, well, the builds are fairly different a lot of the time, and it's like, do you choice restrict NLK with the Gastil Demonas? It's like, I don't know, it's kind of strange, but like, I was thinking I've ever done a choice restriction between a main deck unit and a G unit, so it'd be like a deck list restriction instead of like a main deck or G zone deck restriction. So I feel like it'd be pretty interesting how they would handle that. I put that under one of my like if Thanos like restrictions, but I feel like if they decide to hit Azel and Gladiolus, then they would probably also hit NLK in some way, because those feel like the top 3, but the thing is, they're the top 3 of the previous format. Right now, Bermuda is popping up in Premium as well, and it hasn't gotten any results yet because there's been no English events, and in Premium in WGP it did basically nothing. So I don't know why. I think the deck is really good, but it didn't, and so I don't know if they're going to restrict it yet. I think this is more of a contender for the next restriction list, but then if, Team League has a, Bermuda on every single slot in Premium and Standard, that's going to be pretty fun as well in a lot of ways. But I think that's kind of my take on Premium. Now for Standard, I think that a lot of people would expect me to start with Caro, but I think the more obvious restriction, or at least the one that I believe is more likely to happen, is Sweeper Acro Canto for Tachikaze, because Tachikaze has shown to be really, really good. It won WGP, it got 3rd in BCS World Finals, and overall Tachikaze is just really, really good. It's very strong, it steamrolls, it's one of those decks that you can't really fight back against. Like, you can, but it's very difficult, and you have to go through a lot of hoops compared to every other matchup, in my opinion. And I feel like Bushiroad probably sees that as a problem by now. And I don't know if they designed Tachis to be this strong, or if it just so happened that they made a bunch of cards and they didn't put them together initially, and then once players started putting them together, they're like, this is really good. And that's just how it happened. So I feel like Sweeper Acrocanto is the main possible hit for Tachikaze without hitting like Anger Blader or something, because I feel like Sweeper Acrocanto is an important card, but it's a little bit on the like iffy side because it builds up gauge once per turn, but still builds up gauge, and it also has that immunity effect plus the power building on opponent's turn, making it a hard to remove target, and it's a one of the main pieces of the win con for Anger Blader, because it can restand that fat attacker that can't be targeted and can't be like, just like some decks can't even attack into it because the power is already too big and they can't reach it, you know, and things like that. So I feel like Sweeper Acrocanto is one of the best targets to restrict if you're going to restrict Tachikaze in Standard, and I feel like that deck is looking to be restricted. I feel like we don't talk about it that much, but it does feel like one of the main, like, I don't know, offenders of the past format, and I mean going forward too. I think that this will be very, very strong. Then, we already talked about this a fair bit, but I really don't know how they're going to handle Riviere. I feel like Karo is the obvious answer, because that way you still have a great deck that you can play. Riviere is still going to be really strong. You just lose that, like, specific Riviere Searcher. And losing that Searcher, you know, making a choice restriction, just like Lizelot was with Sonata, make it no Riviere and Karo in the same deck, and bam, perfect. That's all you really need. I think that way Karo doesn't become a dead card. You can still play it in other decks, as it was probably designed to be, and at the same time, Riviere doesn't become a dead deck either. You can just play other cards. You can play the Coral variant, you can play a bunch of other Grade 2s, like there's plenty of good cards in Bermuda, so obviously not of the same level as Karo for the purpose that it has, but the deck doesn't die. Like, that's my main point, is that the deck will still be good, it won't die, and therefore that's fine. So, Karo, maybe. I'm going to give it a maybe. I don't know if they'll go for it. It's a new card, it's a new deck, and it didn't top. The thing is, there was like one Riviere in top 8 of WGP Standard, I think. And I mean, it depends if they look at it as a problem or not, or if they, I don't know. It really depends. I can't really say for sure that Karo will get restricted, or how they'll approach restricting Riviere. They could restrict her backup Grade 3. That makes it a bit more consistent. Or they could just not touch the deck at all. Sorry, I fumbled over my own words, but I could see that happening as well. It has potential. And then, up next, if they do restrict Karo, it's again the question of like, well, if you restrict all the best decks, you know, the two that kind of steamrolled the format, you know, what's left? We still have, obviously, Vanquisher, Revon, Claret, etc. that are coming out soon in English, but like, those decks are great, but I don't think they're unfair. I don't know if they like the longevity of Pale Moon, and if they don't like it, then Dorian is definitely going to get hit. Either Dorian or Romy. I think those two cards are like, things Romy hit basically, I kind of want to say kills the deck. It doesn't really kill the deck like outright, but Romy is your main soul setter and also your main like stack accelerator / like just thinning through your deck really fast. So Romy feels super important, but Dorian is literally like the bread and butter of the deck. Like, Dorian is often your first Grade 3. Dorian is the reason why the deck can survive against a lot of matchups, the reason why it can grind out a lot of games and wait for that win con. So I don't know if they will hit Pale Moon. This depends on how they look at it, because Pale Moon was never the number one. It was either Hyuga or, you know, Bermuda or something else, and it was often sitting in third, or I think mostly in third place in terms of tops. And so it also doesn't feel as abusive or as like super strong as the other decks. So I feel like the Pale Moon shouldn't get a restriction, but if it does, those are my two potential guesses. I'd be happy if they don't, because I really like the deck, but like, I think if they want to Thanos snap the format, you know, and just like rebalance everything, then Dorian could take an L, but I mean, I don't think Pale Moon will take an L. I honestly think they're going to keep that. I think they're just going to address the obvious things, like I said, which is just Tachikaze and potentially Revere. The last one, by restricting, thing is, Axel decks essentially sort of keep the Force decks in check as well. And so because, like, I mean, this kind of is weird to talk about in that sense because Force is supposed to have a good matchup against Axel, but the thing is that because we're seeing, like, the next half a year is mostly Force decks being supported with a little bit of Protect here and there, it's gonna be a Force meta whether you like it or not. Like, just by popularity, just by how popular these units and clans are, we will definitely be mostly seeing like Tri-3 and everything that comes after that being played in most tournaments, plus that MLB deck is coming out. So Force decks will definitely be all over the place for the BCS season and for like late Springfest even, because the set comes out in June or May, I can't remember. But, you know, considering that and the fact that that's how the releases will be, I think that maybe they don't want to even touch the Axel decks outside of Anger Blader too much, because they may want to keep them just because through the way that the player base works, those decks can still be viable and they won't be too dominant or repressive, and therefore like it's okay that Pale Moon player can have his Lukier deck be viable for like half a year at least, or maybe even going into a year, because that's when the next restriction list would be coming in. So that's how I think this might play out. We might literally just see a Tachikaze restriction, maybe a Bermuda restriction, and that's it. So that's what my predictions are, actually. Those basically what I said for Premium and Standard. I want to hear what you guys think might get restricted, or if you think it's going to be no changes once again, or if they're going to go super far and just Thanos snap the entire format for both games, which I don't think they'll do. I think the format isn't that unhealthy to, or that boring, you know, because that's usually the two main reasons. The format is boring, so it's like if it's the same format for over a year, that usually happens, or if it's every deck is abusive, but I don't think that's the case, and there's not enough support coming out for all these clans to make them playable again afterwards, so I think it would be going a bit too far. So that's going to be it for me today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you guys think in the description. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, you know, with your predictions and all of that. But on that note, I'm going to get out of here. So I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.